Welcome to Season 2, Episode 34 of our monologue series. The topic today is why nobody studies the therapy people were in just before they died or took their own life. Now, somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500 Canadian men will take their own lives this year. I have looked for it, and I have never found a single study that went to the families of those men and asked one question. What therapy was he in 30 or 60 days before he died? Nobody asks. Nobody produces those reports. Now, we publish evidence for what works, but nobody publishes what the failures were doing at the time. Now, I started out coaching trauma using NLP, and then I read a study out of the Department of Psychiatry at Oxford, and it described a mechanism, visual-spatial tasking of the short-term working memory, and the results were impressive. So I went back and I reviewed what I was doing, and I analyzed it, I studied it, and then I did the same thing to every other high efficacy modality I could find. Now, every single one of them included visual spatial tasking, and that should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Because knowing the mechanism isn't the same as proving it worked on the person sitting in front of you. So I became obsessed with three things. I became obsessed with creating results, measuring the results in a recognized way, and then replicating the results. Now, most of this field does the first one and stops. And here's what I'm saying that almost nobody in mental health will say out loud. If you've been in therapy for years and you feel the same, that's not your fault. And you're not treatment resistant. Bottom line is the therapy isn't working and didn't work. Now, it may have been a low efficacy therapy structurally, or it may have been delivered badly. But I'm telling you that your progress was never measured along the way, so nothing was ever changed. Nobody, not you or your clinician or the insurance company, knew. And that is part people can't get their head around. Your therapist doesn't know either, because nobody is measuring your change. It's all anecdotal. So why do you feel the same after years of therapy? Because the memory, specifically the affective memory, was never resolved. Think about what happens in a tragic event. Your amygdala goes on high alert. And that's the correct thing to do. That's what it's there for. But years later, or maybe decades later, your amygdala is still scanning. And it's scanning for a danger that no longer exists. And that is an affective memory. And every single day, you pull the latent negative emotional charge out of that memory and into your current experience. Your amygdala scanning, you're on high alert, there's cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline running through you. And that charge is being pulled into the present. And you know what it does? It denies you access to your future. You did the work. The therapy you were in did not touch the layer that it needed to get to. It worked on symptoms. And the symptom keeps regenerating because the thing regenerating the systems has never been resolved. In the last episode, I used a broken arm metaphor where the doctor never x-rayed it, gave you pain meds for the pain and sleep meds to help you sleep, but never addressed the actual injury, only the symptoms, pain and the inability to sleep. Now imagine if 70% of broken arms never healed. There'd be red flags being thrown up everywhere. Here's what could potentially change. When you target the affective memory while it's labial, while it's open and activated, and you use a technique that includes visual spatial tasking with short-term working memory, you can get spectacular results. And these results stick. Recurrence is very low in research. What's happening is memory reconsolidation. The memory comes back as what I call a coherent memory. A coherent memory can be recalled clearly, concisely, in detail, without any inappropriate or unwarranted negative emotional response. Now you might ask me what inappropriate or unwarranted actually means. So I'm going to give you an example from my own life. And any parent watching this will understand that nothing is more traumatizing than losing your child. I had that experience. I held my first son while he passed away 34 years ago. And I could tell you that story clearly, coherently, in detail, without any inappropriate or unwarranted negative emotion. At Christmas, we all think about him. On his birthday, we think about him. And yes, I would love to have a 34-year-old son, and I don't. The negative emotions are gone. The emotions that I retain are appropriate and they're warranted, and the event is in the past where it belongs. And I've gone on to have 5 more children. That's what healing actually looks like. Not numbness, not forgetting. The negative emotional charge comes off and the event stays where it happened. And I don't ask you to take my word for it. In my work, I gather 5 levels of evidence with every trauma client I coach. 5. First, I do the Zimbardo time perspective inventory from Phil Zimbardo at Stanford University. The second, I use a PSSI-5, a digitized form of it from Edna Foa, who consults to the Veterans Administration. I do behavioral evidence. People, when they're traumatized, have stopped doing things they love to do, and they've started doing behaviors they don't want to have. I also do a modified activity card from Marshall Goldsmith. This is a really highly advanced personal assessment card. And lastly, I do anecdotal checks every single session. 5 levels of evidence. Now, in the pilot study with women who had come out of human trafficking, using those types of assessment and assessed by an independent third party, not by me, they had an 86.6% reduction in symptoms, and 10 out of 11 women, which is greater than 90%, who completed it no longer met the diagnostic criteria for trauma. You can't argue with that. Those numbers are sound. More importantly is the posture is sound. We need to do assessment. Now, there's an abundance of reputable, internationally recognized assessments out there. You might do a PHQ-9 for depression, or a JD-7 for anxiety, or a CAPS-5 or a PCL-5 for trauma. Almost all of these are free. So if somebody tells you there's no time and no resources to measure, specifically financial resources, from my point of view, what they're actually saying is that they don't want to be measured. So here's what I want you to do. If you're in therapy right now, ask your clinician one question. What recognized psychometric assessments did you run before we started, and when are we running them again? I guess that's actually 2 questions. You're entitled to those answers, and how they respond will tell you almost everything. Now, if you're a practitioner, I'm going to suggest you start measuring what you're actually doing. Not just anecdotal, but recognized psychometric assessments before and after. Now, if you're not getting 70, 80, 90% results with little to no recurrence, I encourage you to go and learn different modalities. You can look at the literature, be curious. Find modalities that actually include visual-spatial tasking. I guarantee it will increase your effectiveness. And from my perspective in my work, trauma is an injury, and injuries heal. But nobody can tell you whether your trauma is healed unless somebody measures it. And just where I started, I'll end. Nobody asks those families what therapy their lost brothers, sisters, or husbands or friends were in just before they died. Maybe it's time somebody asks that question.